So the question is this: how do entrepreneurs like us, who don't have an endless supply of cash, how do we leverage the best apps, virtual assistants, automation tools and systems to scale our businesses, increase our profits and have more time to do what we love to do each day? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name's Dr. Steve Day and this is Systemize Your Success. Hi, Kevin. Absolute pleasure to have you on the Systemize Your Success podcast today. Thank you for coming along.
Oh, just a pleasure to be invited, actually, because I'm so passionate about the whole concept of systemization. And, we talked offline about building things, building reputation, building legacy, building business, building systems. We're all building something, or we're all trying to build something. And the best way to build anything is if you can systemize it, so it has a life way beyond you. And I think what you're doing is outstanding work, and glad to be a part of sharing some of our processes ourselves and how we do that with building wealth.
Fantastic. I'm really excited and looking forward to this. For anyone who hasn't listened to it, I did a interview with Christian Rodwell, which is Kevin's business partner, a couple of weeks ago. It'll probably be published the same week as this one. And in that, we touched on the roadmap, which we'll cover in a second, and we'll go back into it in a bit more detail in certain areas. And it was inspiring. It is a system for creating financial freedom, and that is a powerful thing in my eyes. So let's start with why you do this. So, and I've listened to your story, but for those of the listeners that haven't and don't know anything about you or who you are, just give us the sort of the 3-minute version of your history and why you actually ended up doing what you do today.
Yes, it's a really good question, and you were right just to check whether I was comfortable sharing the story, because invariably, stories can bring a lump to your throat when you talk about them, when they're very genuine. So, look at my face. I'm a wizened old geezer now, but I wasn't when I started. So it was 1985 was when the big catalyst hit me. And I believe everybody needs some form of a catalyst to overcome the inertia of what holds people back in trading time for money. And the catalyst for me started then when I got the news of the tragic death of my father, who had started life working in the shipyards in Newcastle upon Tyne, which is where I'm from. The accent is under there somewhere. And he'd latterly got very successful in creating a business when the North Sea oil was very big and popular. And so he was kind of doing that work, and he was an agent, and he had workers working for him and contracted to the big oil companies and doing rather well until he wasn't. And he died at 46. He died on an oil rig. He collapsed and died there. They couldn't fly him off, and he died there. Now, while tragedy is not necessarily the instigator of all change, certainly for me, as a young guy, young economist at the time, my father and I walked the same, talked the same, looked the same. We were genetic peas in a pod. And while tragic, and everybody will see some kind of tragedy in their life somewhere, I'm sure. I mean, even just recent years have told us that. What it did for me is just made me think that as I approached the date when I was getting married, which I got married in 89, I thought, if I don't live as long as my dad, and we definitely are the same person, I can't save enough money to give a life, a legacy, an expectation of security for the wife I was going to marry and the kids I'd planned to have. Now, I've got 3 grown-up kids now. I'm all in their 20s. Actually, one now just turned 30. So, that's been great. But what it prompted me to do, and I think I was fortunate in one point here, which was I had the chance not to start to trade time for money. So I didn't get caught up in the angst and the tyranny of the routine of it, and to then build a life that demanded the ongoing income and the dependency on that income. And so I had a conversation with Sarah and said, look, this is what I want to do. I don't want to be in a job anymore. Apart from that, I'm unemployable anyway, I've discovered. Such a control freak, it's untrue. But I decided that I had to learn how to build things that I could then own, and then I could pass them on, which is really a system. And that's what I set out to do. And while there was no pathway, there were no mentors, there were no guides, there was nothing, just my own intellect and still needing to earn money, of course. And little by little, I learned a process, and essentially, ultimately, it's through business and creating businesses that have a high degree of recurring income, which I'm sure we'll talk about, because recurring income is at the heart of wealth. And I've built IP, my own intellectual property over time, which still remains up for challenge for anybody. Your erudite listener is welcome to challenge, to help me find 8 assets in life. I've only found 7, and I've applied my laser intellect over the years. And I know you covered those with Christian, who so ably demonstrated his knowledge of those 7 assets, I have to say. I was so impressed. There's a little system in itself there, isn't there? That, Christian, who's a lot younger than me, is so able to demonstrate the use of the intellectual property that I created, and has now kind of turned that into a system that now another business of wealth builders can be delivered by not me. While I'm still the visionary in the company and the spokesperson in the company, I wasn't needed, actually. And we launched one of our processes, the launch of the academy, just yesterday, in fact. And he did a sterling job. But anyway, that's the point. Over the course of time, I just managed to focus, and it took me about 15 years. He died at 46, and I vowed to become completely financially independent by 45. So it took me 15 years of kind of learning and earning, and then finding and making mistakes, and then learning again, and finding that it's business and assets that are the real skill. And now we've honed the process so much we can teach it in 5. So anybody can follow a holistic, impartial, step-by-step, easy to follow process. Not easy as in it takes 6 months. It doesn't. It takes about 5 years. And if you can do that and be financially free forever, if I started at 30 and would have been financially free a decade earlier than I was, that would have been so much more valuable in terms of how I would have lived my life, the time I would have spent, the things that I would have done. And so many people now are discovering that pathway and not having to wait till they're in their 60s or unfortunately die and don't see any form of retirement. I'm so pleased that we created a process that people can follow and get to that level of financial independence decades earlier. And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, I think it's something, I think it's a wonderful thing that you've created. And I think it's life-changing for so many people. But I actually wanted just to reflect on some of the things in your story. And I don't know if you know my story at all, but my dad also died suddenly, not of a heart condition, but not actually of a heart attack, and completely undiagnosed, rare condition that we don't really understand why even today. And that's similar to you. Sorry, I am his genetic copy. I walk in a room with my older relatives, and they sort of double take and think it's my dad, 20 years ago.
Wow.
And so those same thoughts I had, or very similar thoughts to Sugar, what happens if that happens to me? At the time, I'd just not, I was a month away from starting my first family, as in my son was born a month after he died. And so those same questions were, well, what happens if that happens to me in 15 years time? Will I have had the time to generate the security for my family? And at the time I was actually working as a doctor, and exchanging my time for money. And within a couple of months I'd quit. And
that's a bold decision too, right?
And gone down the route that I now take. So I just wanted to reflect on that to sort of, I really relate to your story. And I think that the why is so important. And I know you talk about this a lot. And when I speak to a lot of business owners who are doing whatever they're doing in business, whether it's property or Amazon or whatever. And often the why may not actually drive them. In my case, I actually love what I do. Like I genuinely, I found my dream job. I've created my dream job. But sometimes the why doesn't need to be the why you're doing the thing. It needs to be the why you're doing a thing that's not exchanging time for money. So I think that is a really important message or lesson for people to take away, to know what the why is.
Well, I think I call it now a catalyst, actually.
Yeah.
And we can go back to basic principles, but if we take Newton's first law, which is an object at rest stays at rest, and I think this is what happens with people in jobs. They're an object at rest. They're moving, but they're not moving. They're just in a vortex. They're in a whirlpool, and they're not moving at all. They're kind of gradually getting more money, but their expenses go with that. And the big tragedy is the massive change for high income professionals like doctors and dentists and people in the medical profession and others, lawyers and others, where they earn significantly well, and quite rightly for the intellect and the and the skill and all the things they bring to the world. But invariably, when they stop, and that it does stop, it's a temporary thing, it's never a permanent thing, then their income stream drops massively, because the pension that they've relied on, usually one thing they rely on is the stock market. I mean, obviously with certain medical professions, you're getting a government-backed pension, but even that's not necessarily as guaranteed in the future as it was in the past, because we're having to pay more to keep society going. And those people who don't have the backup of a public sector scheme invariably left to the mercy of the stock market. So there's a tragic consequence. So I think the whole point about getting a reason why is a reason to overcome inertia.
Yeah.
This is my first ROI, so I talk about ROIs a lot. As an economist, we often talk about these things, but reason to overcome
return on investment.
Yeah. But I kind of play with that theme, and I've got 11 different ROIs now. And but reason to overcome inertia is the first one.
Yeah. Different ROI.
Different ROI, yeah. And another one, just for fun, just as we're getting to know each other, Steve, is you're never more than one relationship, opportunity, or idea from completely transforming your wealth. So I try and be that for other people. I try and give them either inspiration or a bit of knowledge or a distinction or a connection to somebody else, because I'm both a connector and a creative individual. So I create and connect. And interestingly enough, when you talk about the medical profession, I think about myself with a CAT scan brain to diagnose someone's financial health. So I'm definitely a GP of sorts, except, without the formal qualification of that and without swearing a Hippocratic oath, but certainly completely obsessed with the idea of helping people to overcome that inertia and to become financially independent, because I know how different life is when you have the choice to do everything you want on your own terms. There's a long answer, but there you go.
Yeah, it's a good answer there. So I'm very happy to listen to it. You mentioned the word obsession there. So you're obsessed with it. And I think that's something that I relate to again. And also the idea of sort of being able to spot for you the CAT scan for the financial problems, whatever. And that's what I feel I do with businesses and systems and freeing people's time. It's just an interesting I feel the same way. I'm totally obsessed with it. And my wife will tell you that, I'm a total geek and I've learned to actually put my family in a position, first, but actually as an entrepreneur, that can be quite difficult. It's our baby, and actually putting that first can sometimes get in the way of other relationships. And so obsessed is a great word, I think. And I think most people that are very successful in business are usually a little bit obsessed. So
I think we seem like, without knowing it, Steve, we may be kindred spirits here.
Yeah, sounds like it. Kevin, you talked about the pillars, the 7 pillars?
7 assets. Yeah.
7 assets. Sorry, that's what I meant to say.
We call them pillars, and the reason for that is we're trying to give people a vision in their mind of creating a wonderfully structured building with a solid foundation, 7 sturdy pillars, and a completely watertight roof. That's essentially the logo for wealth builders.
Yeah.
So carefully crafted, deliberately designed. And that's what it's about. So the pillars, or the things we talk about, are assets. And there's a fundamental difference. And I'm sure people have appreciated it through seminal books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the various ongoing things from that. The best book I think he's written is Cash Flow Quadrants, actually, which I think is a better articulation of what you can do. But nonetheless, but we don't work with that. It's my own IP. Christian demonstrated that there are 7 and only 7 assets that people can use to build wealth. And most people have got some. I mean, they're doing it intuitively, but they tend to do it just on their home, their pension, and their investments. And the challenge with that for most people is it's all destined for when they're old. You can't really tap into your pension when you're young. You can't really tap into your investments when you're young because you're trying to build them. And most people live in a home. They don't generate an income from their home. So consequently, the vast majority of people have a double whammy of relying on one source of income and one plan for their wealth. And invariably, they fall short. And 95% of people get into that trap, I'm afraid. What we're trying to do is say, well, there are other assets you can use, such as property, such as business, which is my favorite, such as intellectual property and systems, which would probably be yours, but there's an overlap in all of these things anyway. And then joint ventures and collaborations, becoming a bank really, and removing the intermediation from the market to say, hey, banks have made profits for years. Let me act like a bank, and I'll use my money like a bank and make decisions like a bank and make profits like a bank. And you can do that by taking money in the things that you think are static, like your pension and your investments and your property, and you just take access to some of the capacity in there and you move it and make it work. And that's why so many of our clients tap into their equity, tap into their pensions, and certainly the pensions more than anything else, I think, because it's the most overlooked and undervalued asset of all. People just park their pensions until they're old and grey, and it's just really a waste of resources. And more often than not, it's the industry of financial services that's building wealth, not necessarily the individuals themselves. So we kind of are quite keen on pushing back against tradition and trying to get people to be empowered for themselves and get enough knowledge, enough support, feeling of a community and connection, so they don't feel isolated and they don't feel like, who do I trust and where do I go to? And that's what we're creating in Wealth Builders, which is a thriving community of like-minded people with a singular focus of becoming financially independent, but enjoying the journey on the way. Not just, it's not the money, it's the journey and enjoying that, accumulating wisdom, and then transferring the wisdom onto the next generation. So the money doesn't die, the money perpetuates. So, another part of my thought process is I have a difference of opinion, I think, fundamentally with traditional financial planning, which is you build your nest egg, you create a legacy, then you distribute the legacy. In other words, you pay it out. I don't think that's wise. I think if you give money, you die, like my dad died, didn't leave anything, unfortunately, because didn't leave a will, didn't leave a business plan or a business succession plan, didn't leave life cover to pay off a mortgage, just didn't get round to things. And I think, that's part of the challenge as well, just people don't get around to things. But the thing they don't almost never get around to is discussing money with the next generation. So it's almost like mum and dad die, leave money, people obviously grieve for the loss of the people in their life, money gets spent, end of money. I'm not sure that's wise. I think there's a bigger value, which is treating the next generation with respect and using the money you accumulate to give them choices and options, but to give them the wisdom to almost carry on the same thinking, modernize it, bring it up to date with their thinking, but by incorporating them into the plan, they then perpetuate it, and therefore the money never gets distributed. It's almost like a perpetual trust fund, a self-replenishing bank account that serves this generation, the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. And everybody's part of that process. That's our ambition, and we call it writing a family charter. It's nothing to do with writing a will, although a will is an important thing. It's all about leaving a legacy within people, not leaving a legacy to people.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on a couple of things in this. Is really interesting stuff. Apologies, my alarm going off in the background. So whether it was by luck or by engineering or whatever, I wouldn't like to say, but the idea of your relatives, older relatives, generating wealth in their lives, passing it down, and then it getting squandered or spent, or maybe even used for genuine purposes, but maybe it's putting your kids in school or putting it into some other very valuable thing in your life, but it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
And my grandmother, she was didn't really have any income to speak of. She was a nurse. She retired early. She looked after kids. She lived basically on her state pension, and then a small amount of money from my granddad, just to sort of make ends meet. She shopped in Oxfam. She ate, green beans. She grew all her own vegetables. Like total frugal. It's the absolute tea. But she saved every single penny she had to give to her grandkids. And she died when I was relatively young, about 12 or that sort of age, about 12. When I came 18, I actually asked my grandfather could I have early access to what was a small inheritance, a modest inheritance, £10,000 or thereabouts. And we discussed it, and he agreed in the end to let it go, because I decided to buy an investment property.
Right.
And that one decision in my life, which came from just I'm paying a stupid amount of rent in my student digs. It's an absolute dump.
Yeah.
I checked out how much it would cost to buy it, and I was like, we did the math, and I was like, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And it was that one decision that, I just decided to do that math and come up with this idea. And from then on, I've created a relatively large portfolio with no other real financial investment, just simply from reinvesting, all from that my grandmother's small inheritance. So I'm really proud of that, because it's something that she would have been incredibly proud of me doing. And so, I just wanted to share that little story. So I totally agree.
That was, £10,000 worth of seed capital, but it planted more than the intellectual seed in you. It gave you the watering can to be able to make it come true. So lots of things overlapping with you and I, Steve. It's getting a bit scary now.
It is. Yeah, and it's a very good point. I never really thought of it like that, but it's so obvious when you say it, is the fact that she was so frugal. I was never going to squander that money. The fact that she'd worked so hard to save every penny she could, I knew that I would not do anything but make that money mean something. And that was the gift that she gave me. So,
that's right. And I'm certainly never advising to anybody frugality. You can't save your way to wealth. And that's a different generation, of course. But I believe in bringing the children into the debate. And I don't mean force feeding them knowledge and highbrow concepts and economic concepts and all sorts of things like that. I just mean gradually starting to let children participate in things in the way they do and have fun with them and educate them. And so we're creating a program which is not out yet, but it will be by the end of the year, called Wealth Builders for Teens. And it's to allow the parents in our community to become better instructors of financial literacy to the next generation, because the schools are not taking care of that.
Fantastic. That's something I would definitely like to learn more about in the future. My son's only 5 at the moment, but soon, I guess we're starting him now, pocket money and earning money and not just getting given things. So we're starting on that. So
there'll be some lessons for the younger ones, and but we won't get into that today unless you.
We'll cover that when it's released, and you can jump back on again. And I think that just picking up from carrying on really from that story, and something you touched on there was about being frugal, and it is a generational thing. Because if you go back to my grandparents' generation, it was pay down your mortgage. It was, save, put your money in like stocks and shares, in your pension. It was all those things that you described, which are sensible in some ways, but they're never going to give you freedom. And my dad was brought up by those people, and he had that same mindset. So even though he was all for me investing in property, he was scared that I kept on reinvesting that money and growing that money by leveraging. And leverage is something you talk a lot about. And for me, that has created my wealth simply by saying, look, the banks will lend me more money because I don't pay the interest. I don't, the rental income pays the interest and then some.
Yeah.
The banks see it as a safe bet. So they'll give me more money to go and buy another house because they think, well, he knows what he's doing. And that is how the ability to snowball your wealth. Whereas my dad was always saying, when are you going to switch your mortgages to repayment? When are you going to stop, leveraging the property, or we need to use the word leverage, when are you going to stop borrowing more money? So I just wanted to, bring that up and just see your thoughts on this. I know this is.
Well, I think it's a balancing act, so leverage is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. And I'm not for or against it. I'm just saying that in building wealth, you must employ some form of leverage. So it's logical to talk about financial leverage. But I think people can make mistakes with it because they can see it just cuts one way. So, for example, if history is an unfortunate habit of repeating itself, and we saw in 2007-8 when people were maximizing their leverage, so they're borrowing as much as they can, refinancing every 6 months, squeezing the pips out of the value of the property. You take a deterioration of value of property and a tightening of lending, then all of a sudden, you've got a double whammy. Your property's worth less and your interest costs have gone up. So what you thought was a predictable income is less predictable. And of course, if the tenants don't keep paying, or they call in, or the lenders call in the debt, which they can do, it's their right, things can go wrong and you get negative equity. And so I think it's a balance. So usually I might have a conversation with someone and say, well, look, let's work out what it is you want to achieve financially to be completely financially independent. So they might say, 10,000 a month, and go, okay, how are you going to achieve that? Well, okay, if I get 10 properties giving me 1,000 a month, I'll get £10,000. Okay. Net. Okay. So what have you factored in is the interest rate? Okay. 3%. Okay. Why don't you double it and assume it was 6? See how that stress test works. And by the way, don't stop at 10. Why don't you keep going? Because then every property over and above 10, you can take the profit from that and start to gradually repay your debt. So you get from 70% to 60 to 50 to 40 to 30. And you can, so in other words, you start to become more watertight once you've got to a certain level, rather than assuming you can carry on ad infinitum, because things don't ever carry on that way. So it's all about balance, really.
Yeah. So again, to relate back, it's fascinating. So in 2007, I was in a position where I was pretty highly leveraged. I'd done 85-90% mortgages on everything. And I found myself in negative equity on all but one of my properties. Right. Luckily, I lived in one, but I actually rented out some rooms. So it wasn't a huge financial burden. But so I was in a situation where I had properties, couldn't sell them, not really making any money on them because the interest had gone up before they came back down again, and then obviously they became profitable again. And so that's one of the reasons now. So I think this is moving seamlessly on to I think it's something we can touch on if you have time, Gavin, to talk about business in a little bit more detail. Because when I then came, as I've mentioned before, started working as a doctor in 2007-8, and then a few years later, when I left, I had the choice: do I go back into property, or do I do something else? And I made, after exploring property as an option and putting a lot of time and resources into deciding if that was the right thing to do, the one deciding factor was, if we repeat 2007, which we will, or it has even happened, then where do I sit again? Do I sit in a position with no income coming from my properties? I can't sell them to release equity, and I'm forced then to go and do something else. So I made that decision at that moment to say, no, I'm going to actually use all the skills I've learned in my life and build a business on something I love. And that's, we go right back to the beginning of the interview where the why kicked in. Yeah. And so building a business for me was one of my lifelong passions. The only thing I've ever really wanted to be. I never wanted to be a spaceman or a racing car driver. I wanted to be a businessman, even before I really knew what that meant. The games I played as a kid were like, obviously Monopoly and things like that, but I played like Maxi Bourse, which is a stock exchange game, and farming, and the business game, and all these games that basically, like when I was a 6-7-year-old kid, that's what I actually enjoyed doing. And so for me, it was a lifelong dream, and so I'm so happy now that I'm actually on that path to do this. And so let's use that as a segue into something that actually Christian told me about that I really wanted to pick up with you. And that is about something you call, I believe, the three-pronged plug of business. And this is hugely close to my heart with what I now do, which is how do you build a business that runs without you? Because ultimately that's my game. And I want to know what your take on this is and why you think it's possible and what are the key factors people should be thinking about.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good segue. I would say, just to bridge that segue one step further before we get into that question specifically, is the challenge though when people make a decision to move from employeeship to something else is if they put all their eggs in one basket again. So it tends to be that over concentration. So we're always advocating multiple streams of income from multiple pillars of wealth. Now, business is my favorite. The reason why is because the ROI is infinite. There is no restriction. There's no market restriction. There isn't a sort of a rental level or an interest rate market. You can, as long as you have the ability to satisfy and solve the problems of other people, there is no limit to the amount of return on your investment you can make. And in fact, you can turn it into an infinite return, particularly if you don't need to be in the business. So you can do that. The 3-point plug is almost like, where did I come up with that? Well, I thought about a lot of people get mistaken when they think about business, because business is as much a trap as any other activity. Because when people pursue their passion, and you just elegantly explained yours, but business owners who do that can get caught in the trap of trading time for money in that very business because they're following their passion. And that can still be temporary because you're still trading time for money and you can't ever get away from it. And almost inevitably, you can't sell it. And like nobody would ever say you've got an ugly baby, people will not tell you you've got an ugly business. It's just the way it is. So I thought, well, what would be the ingredients of a business that I would invest in as I discovered myself to be an entrepreneur, an unemployable person, therefore I've got to be an entrepreneur because there's nobody else will hire me. What was that? Well, I came up with 3 things. Number 1, the most important, a business has a high degree of recurring income. Now, I don't mean that selfishly, like you need a business that takes advantage. The opposite. If you solve the problem of customers' needs and you do it consistently, and you do it consistently, you continue to focus on adding value, you obsess about adding value, the more value you deliver, the longer they'll stay. And therefore, it's good for them to get recurring value, and it's good for you to get a recurring income. Now, the recurring income then gives you the ability to allow some of the other points of the power socket to work. The second one is to operate within a very clearly defined niche so that you can create unique points of differentiation. You can become outstanding in your field. You don't want to be just, also ran. You don't want to be mediocre. You don't want to be just doing what other people do, but create a niche, focus on the niche, deliver an outstanding service to the niche. And ideally they want value ongoing, and you can deliver ongoing. Then that gives permission to number 3, which I know will resonate with you. The ability for the business to work without you doing the work. So the income and the revenue show up, but you don't need to show up anymore because you've created an elegant system that delivers to the niche, gives them recurring value in that niche, and keeps sharpening yourself in that. And then it gives you freedom to try out different things. You can take a risk because you've got a recurring income business giving you money every month. You can look at another niche and start to see different ways, and you become like a specialist, using that GP thing again, or that doctor's thing again. You become so good at it. And I've discovered that I can look at a business and look at it from, there are more angles than that, but they're the primary 3. If I can talk to a business owner and say, look, let's talk about your business. There's some consequence of this. If you can get a recurring income business proudly sitting in a niche that can work without you, you've got choice. Whereas if you're just delivering service yourself, you don't have that choice. And more often than not, if you think about how businesses are exited, and some people might want to keep the business and just get an ongoing recurring income, nothing wrong with that. Others may want lump sums of capital, so you can sell a business, because the primary concern of an acquirer of a business is the predictability of the profit. They don't care what you did, how you built it. What they care about, what is the predictability of the profit? And you go, this is how this little sucker works. It's a great business. Here's the niche we serve. Here's why they keep buying, repeat, repeat, repeat. And this is why I don't need to be there. It will work for you. I don't need to do it. Do you want it? And you'll get a premium price for it in a way that no other business will do, because you'll be tied up in knots with people saying, but the business depends on you being there, Kevin. So you've got to keep delivering, because if you don't deliver, the customers will leave. And if they leave, we need to lock you in for 5 years. Whereas if the business works without you, they don't need to lock you in at all. And that's why I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think that's as I said, incredibly close to my heart, because that's what I'm trying to. I don't try to make myself out to be anything I'm not, and I haven't quite got there yet. But that has always been my passion, and the journey that I've got to the point I'm at. I'm in a position where I can help people get on that, start that journey. So, yeah, hugely important to me. And there was something else I was going to ask you, but no, it slipped my mind, so we'll move on. So, Kevin, I think this has been really nice to speaking to you. Genuinely surprised at how much we have in common, and been really good to connect with you on this. So I'd just like to finish by asking you a couple of signature questions, if I may. First off, give us your top two or three apps or browser plugins that you use on a regular basis that you think are great.
So there's definitely we in the business, because I just tune into, as the visionary in the business, what's going on, and that's always held using Asana. So Asana is the easy tool we use there. There's a great little app actually that I'd recommend, which is it's a bit of an odd one, but I really like it because it demonstrates the inefficiency of the stock market really well and blows people away when they understand it. It's called the Old Mutual Attitude to Risk. So you just go online, Old Mutual Attitude to Risk and Risk Discussion. And what it kind of shows you is how impossible it is to manage the stock market, because it just shows you that all your IFA is doing is saying your money's going to operate within plus 35 or minus 20, and there's nothing else they can do about it. So good luck. But meanwhile, we're going to charge you a fee. And I'm saying, well, look, if that's all they can do, you can now see that the biggest difference in your performance is your charges. So just cut your charges to the lowest possible you can when you're in the stock market. And that's a great app that demonstrates that.
Fantastic. Really, really good advice. Second question. Who else do you think would be a wonderful guest on this podcast?
That's a good question. So who do I resonate with who gives a great account of themselves? I'd say Daniel Priestley would be good. He talks very eloquently about, creating businesses and creating key people of influence or a key person of influence, and also how to create assets in your business. I think he's written a book called 24 Assets. Yeah, I think it's 24 Assets.
You're right. I'm just looking at my bookshelf. It's right there. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, right.
It's 27, but you're right.
So he's definitely somebody who's a thought leader.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've read all his books. I think he's a great guy. So yeah, I'm hoping to get him on. Actually, I have pinged him a message because we are friends on Facebook. But
okay.
Well, hopefully he'll come on. We'll see.
Yeah.
The title of this podcast is "Systemize Your Success," but what does success mean to you?
Well, we it's not personal success anymore, but I mentioned earlier on, I suppose when I talked about my father, and I'm originally from Newcastle, as I mentioned, so I'm a very mad fan of Newcastle United. And the St. James's Park there has a stadium which seats about 50,000 people. So success to me is helping 50,000 people cross the bridge like the River Tyne, a wonderful piece of architecture, artistry and engineering all in one, and trying to help those people become completely financially independent. And that's the mission we have at Wealth Builders, is to help 50,000 people become financially independent before I check out of this game.
Brilliant. Okay, very last question. Do you believe you can systemize your success?
Well, you know what? When I heard you and Christian talk about Wealth Builders and the step-by-step process we've created together in this new program called the Wealth Builders Academy, I realized that all the systems are now in play. He's a very, very able teacher of this now. We've got a whole coaching team. The IP is locked in. Obviously, we're honing it little by little, but it's all there. Honestly, I could be a hologram and just walk away and let them take care of it, and the 50,000 would be happening as a result of their hard work. So absolutely right, we can.
Fantastic. What a wonderful legacy to be able to be so proud of actually creating. So well done you. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to this episode. I'm well aware there are hundreds of great business podcasts out there, and you chose to listen to this one, and for that I am truly grateful. Hopefully what you heard today took you one step closer to building a successful business so you can share your passion with the world and serve an ever-growing number of people. If you got value out of today's episode, then so will someone else you know. By sharing with others what has helped you along your way, you will grow your influence and be the guy or girl that everybody wants to know. So please hit the share button right now, and also remember to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss future episodes. It's impossible for me to cover absolutely everything in these podcasts, so please do head over to systemizeyoursuccess.com right now and download the show notes, transcriptions, and some of my best frameworks and systems for free. Thanks again for tuning in and being a part of this amazing community. Until next time, this is Dr. Steve Day, and you've been listening to Systemize Your Success.